2 years of the Zoom life and continue. Awesome. And here I go. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about some tenets I developed as a classroom teacher that allowed me to get high outcomes from kids and to not destroy them in the process. Many times, um, we teachers are cultivated in order to get children, plurilingual, multilingual, translanguaging children, and children from underrepresented backgrounds successful in science. uh, we have to conform them or make them into um, individuals that don't behave or use the wisdom and tools and intergenerational knowledge um, from their backgrounds. We try to get them to assimilate into this kind of Western cultural concept. And I was able to get them to be very good in science without having them do that. So, this is some of the stuff that I developed, some of the principles I developed, and I've translated them into a very practical way of being anti racist, right? So, let me click and go. So, this is me. Welcome. Done that already. Um, some of the guiding principles that I'll be talking about today, there's actually 7 of them. Teacher, know thyself, learn your students and earn their trust, avoid microaggressions, judgments, and grudges, avoid hypocrisy, create emotionally and physically safe spaces in classrooms, know your epistemic practices and your subject matter, and then create classrooms and academic routines that make sense to the kids. So, over my 14 years of working in the classroom, these were some of the common concepts and ideas that I found that really good teachers do these things, but we tend not to make it explicit. And one of my um, experiences, teachers make things explicit. If you are implying or assuming something, you're not teaching it. If you assume students know something, or if you're applying that, well, they went through this experience, so they need to know this. If you don't make what you want them to know and be able to do explicit to them, you are not teaching it. So, your job as a teacher, as a trustworthy content expert whose intentionality and integrity of practice facilitates learning, you're going to be very intentional about what concepts, ideas, and skill sets you want your students to engage in. So here's my ongoing definition of anti-racist teaching practice. And I pull it from Dr. Kendi's definition of one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. And if you're familiar with his work, he makes a big distinction about what being anti-racist is and what when people say I'm not racist. Not racist is not active, right? But being anti-racist means that you are engaging in practices, policies, procedures, conversations that are exposing different inequities and injustices and coming up with solutions or using your privilege in order to close those gaps, those opportunity gaps. To a layperson who doesn't know the intention of an anti racist person, it may seem unfair that they're doing something more for one group as opposed to another. But what they're doing is they're closing opportunities and they're bringing in a concept of equity and justice and removing barriers. And so, for folks who are used to having privilege, whether in the intersectionality world of privilege, it could be anything. When you see someone being facilitated to remove their barriers so that they can bring their ideas and their talents to the table. And you're going, but that seems like you're favoring someone. I think we have to remember that the person who is feeling like equity is injustice, you have to remind them that you didn't have this barrier. And that because you didn't have this barrier, we might not know if your ideas are worthy or not. You just kind of showed up because there was no barriers for you to huddle over, right? This person, I don't know if they have great ideas or the skill sets, but I got to remove the barrier in order to find that out. And so that's the practical concept of being anti-racist. Like, I need to figure out who's at the table and if these ideas can help the community. If you didn't have any barriers and you just showing up, I'm not sure if your ideas or your skill set are really going to solve any problems. But I'm very interested in this person who has just the same amount of qualifications and is just as equal as you, but because they were engaged in a barrier, or a barrier was put in front of them, I don't know. And as a person with privilege and power, I need to get everybody at the table. And so that's kind of what uh, anti-racism is. So using this as a guide, we developed what it means to be an anti-racist teacher. And that's one who plans for, enacts, and interprets and translates student learning outcomes that reliably produce epistemic, intellectual, and creative agency that empowers students to pursue their professional endeavors of their choosing. And so I made a point of saying the professional endeavors of their choosing, because we do a lot of choice for students. We don't do a lot of questioning and investigating on what they actually want to do. So that's kind of the definition of anti-racist teaching practice. I also want to highlight what teaching practice is in this definition. One who plans for, enacts, interprets, and translates student learning outcomes that reliably produce the epistemic and intellectual and creative agency that empowers students. That's what teaching practice is. But now we're focused on removing those barriers so that the students can grow into the professional endeavors of their choosing. That's what makes an anti-racist. We're removing barriers, right? So anti-racist pedagogy then is a system of practices that includes the socially, culturally, historically grounded reflection that influences practice, right? So here's practice again: planning, enacting, learning, interpreting, right? These practices are used to intentionally empower children to define themselves as capable and epistemologically literate human beings. And so my research is grounded in epistemology, right? That's how I became a very successful teacher. I translated science into a number of different practices and explicitly taught these babies how to engage in these things so that brown and black children could have access to biology and chemistry in ways that were meaningful for them and that they thrived. And they thrived using conventional, Western, racist, whatever you want to call them, assessments, right? I never taught to an assessment. I never said, oh, my kids aren't going to be successful because this assessment is created in a vacuum, blah, 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 blah. I come from a space where if you teach children how to be successful and you remove those barriers, there's not a test they can't like crush, right? Um, Black and brown children aren't handicapped in any way. They actually have a lot more skill sets than most people think that they have. So when I gave them the skill sets and the knowledge that their ancestors invented, we got to remember that brown kids here have an ancestral connection to this land that's 20,000 years old. By the time the conquistadors came over here, they already had a concept of zero, were the world's best botanists, and understood how to build pyramids. I think they can pipette. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think they can use a microscope, right? They can do math. Unless, don't get me started on African American children whose ancestry spans 250,000 years. The same brain that left Africa went to the moon. So, what are you talking about that they can't do a Venn diagram on the differences between plant and animal cells? That makes no sense to me. These people's ancestors learned how to read during slavery, one of the most traumatic periods of American history. You talking about that they not from a two-parent home. Look, we learned how to read during slavery. Are you kidding me right now? So I think that we can get through trauma. If any people in the United States can get through trauma, it's African Americans. We done did some trauma. So we forget how resilient and brilliant these kids are, and we forget their intergenerational ancestral knowledge. And we don't put those together in order for them to be capable human beings, right? We've put in even the poly pure hearts, the folks who come in who are tender to our kids, still seem to put them in a deficit bubble, and but we don't acknowledge it because they're so nice to the kids. I'm like, you can be nice to these kids all day and you can talk about their racial, economic, emotional barriers all day, but if they leave your classroom not being able to read or write with comprehension, you just as bad as a racist. So I know I got 15 million more slides, but I had to say that. So in other words, your pedagogy should open up opportunities for students epistemologically speaking. Okay. I live in urban LA, so you don't hear a whole lot of stuff. Anti-racist curriculum vetting. This was something I did with Dr. Nick Henning. This was kind of fun because he has a lot of tools for vetting curriculum. He's like the curriculum guru when it comes to anti-racist curriculum vetting and development. So we came up with this idea that curriculum vetting in an anti-racist lens is the intentional organization of the discipline that leads to equity between racialized ethnic groups and is substantiated by just, equitable, inclusive ideas about what knowledge is, who the knower is, and what the learner contributes to the collective knowledge of the class, right? So as you hear me talk about my brown and black babies, this is this it encapsulates what my intention is when I'm gathering information that empowers students, because I had to know something about the knower. I had to respect who they were. I had to assume that they were going to bring knowledge and I say personal curiosities to science because everybody does, right? And I had to be on my P's and Q's about how to manage that information so that they weren't bored, they wanted to engage, they got to uplift each other, and we formed a community around these curriculum pieces. And if the stuff was racist in the book, we pointed it out. Notice in the definition that it's the intentional organization of the discipline. Like I said before, if you're a teacher, everything you do is intentional. If you just assume that the kids were overlooked the fact that there was nothing but white men in the beginning of chapter 7 on cells, if you overlook that and not mention that this was the time period where Mendel was picking and doing peas, he was doing his genetic work, understanding that there were factors that were being passed from parent flower to offspring, and that there was a certain statistical model that was pulled from that. If you don't explain to the kids that the Civil War was going on at the same time he was picking these peas, and that this monk in the middle of Austria could do this work because of the slave labor that was happening all over the world, specifically the Spanish speaking world, if you're going to bring your brown kids into it, then you have decontextualized that work and you think that this monk was just being nice. Look at him giving us information about peas. No, people were dying to keep Black and brown people in slavery during the time he was picking, and his picking was bankrolled by that labor. So you want to bring those kind of conversations into it so that it's not decontextualized, and they can then make sense of what's happening during that time and give meaning to that work and the fact that their ancestors struggled so that now they could be taught by a Black woman with locks. And we talked about, genetics, and the only reason why you look like your daddy is because your mama liked it. Those are the kind of stuff I would say in class. Anyway. So here's a Padlet that has some of the 7 tenets on there, and some teachers have placed on that Padlet how they would deal with students according to the 7 tenets that I'm about to present. So if you want to look at that, you can. Um, and if during the talk, the rest of the talk, if you want to, what time is it? It's 1 o'clock. Okay, I'm looking at the clock. If you want to add to that any questions or comments or aha moments, by all means, feel free. Okay. So the first tenet is teacher know thyself. And that this is super important for teachers who are going to be teaching kids who don't sound or look like them. This is super important. My first gig, 86% of the school was Mexican or Chicano, because we're in San Diego, we're South San Diego, right? So I had to get to know my students. But in order for me to do right by my kids, I had to know where my self ended and they began, right? So I had to know who I was socially, professionally, culturally, historically, so that I could come at them authentically so they wouldn't be thinking I was crazy. I took that very seriously. And in doing such things, you're becoming more trustworthy to the students, because if the kids don't trust you, they will not learn from you. So I could share knowledge about myself and they could learn me in a way that brought their effective level down. So I cannot stress this enough. When you are knowing yourself and when you're getting to know your strengths as a teacher, you're going to be bringing in your ancestral and immediate family knowledge. So when I was teaching, my first couple of years of teaching, I was very aware that I was bringing in my grandmother, my mom, and my aunt in everything that I was doing with the kids. When I was disciplining the kids, I was my grandmother because Vivian May did not play. When I was mediating conflict between children and bringing in awareness about contradictions and growing up and it being okay to make mistakes, that was my aunt. She does that to this day. She's the family mediator to this day, and she speaks with her hands like I do. And then my mom is the pedagogue. She's a preschool teacher. The way I sound about teacher education is exactly the way my mom sounds about early childhood development. I get my very technical lens from my mom. So I'm bringing in these three women who I love, who molded me and made my brain. And in the moment of teaching and interacting, these women would, their energy would flow through me. That comes off as authentic to the kids. I'm not putting on something I'm not familiar with. I'm not engaging the students in a way that is artificial, right? And then I'm putting on a teacher hat. Actually, I'm just pulling from the strength of my own family. And I can then interpret and translate the knowledge in such a way that the kids are like, oh, yeah, she's cool. And in doing that, you become trustworthy. And that's where the definition of teacher, the trustworthy content expert, the trustworthiness comes from this tenet. And then the second tenet is that you learn your students and earn their trust. So for each student, you need to know a strength, a talent, and a challenge. And then if over time, because you got 182 days with the babies, you're gonna do a student interest, cultural background, linguistic background, and views on schooling. This information allows you to interpret whatever you're teaching in a way that makes it interesting to the kids and that they want to engage. And that most of all, they want to engage with each other about what they're learning. It's very important. Um, you want to also be intentional about facilitating student to student interactions. And you're going, this is a whole lot of stuff. I thought we was coming to an anti-racist teaching talk. All of this is anti-racist, right? And this is just the second tenet. All of this is uh, being, all of this is being as a teacher, like not taking on a profession, but really embodying that deep sense of being a steward of. My mentor says, teaching is the parent of all professions, and it's a very avant-garde, it's a very avant-garde position to be in. And if we mess this up, right, if we mess up getting people prepared for all the professions in this nation, and if we don't help them develop into the people they want to be, not who we want them to be, but who they want to be, then we may not have a democracy, right? I mean, it's super important that we get this right. So the next thing is culturally sanctioned interactions. It's super important if you're teaching children who do not look like you, right? First and foremost, don't touch my hair. That's not on the screen. I'm just saying, don't touch it. You see me walking down the hallway, don't touch Dr. Linton's hair. You may get the smoke. Anyway, one lens is cultural ways of being in a number of ways, like culturally sanctioned social interactions are interactions between two people from two different cultures. And the person who's the outsider gets privilege of that cultural group when they're with the people who acculturated them. Let me repeat that. Culturally sanctioned social interactions are interactions between two people of different cultures where one person has been acculturated in that group and they get to engage in these social interactions with the group that brought them in. So for instance, if you got a Black friend and you go over their house and y'all get to whoop-de-wooing and such and saying, and y'all get to call each other pet names, you can't do that with another Black person because that's not your social circle. You've been culturally sanctioned to do something with that small group of people that are representatives of the larger group. So just because I had Mexican friends doesn't mean I get to walk in the Castle Park and do the things that with my Mexican friends with these children. They're not a part of my social circle. So I'm not culturally sanctioned to do those things. I got to get permission, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? This all came out with, well, why can't we say the N word? My usual response is, why would you want to? Not why can't I, but why would you want to? And one, if you were cultivated by Black people who allowed you to say that, by all means, I have no choice or right in that. But you can't come out that person's house, talk about the N word, because you will get the smoke. It's simple. You don't want these hands. So one lens of cultural ways of being in a number of ways. So being brought up in the culture is how you could be associated with that social interaction. Extensive, intimate contact with that culture. Either you married into it, your friendships, extended family is part of this culture, or you have cultural immersions. Like you went to Thailand and just lived there for 10 years, so you do Thai stuff, right? Being adopted into that culture. Like my mama and daddy are Black. If you white and you're like, I was adopted into a Black family, my mom and daddy are Black, so I'm Black. You know what I mean? You were adopted into that culture. Being trusted by members of a cultural group and having legitimate reasons for acquiring intimate knowledge and expressing behaviors. And this last bullet is where teachers who teach children who do not look like them or are from different cultural backgrounds, that's what you do. Being a trusted member of a cultural group and having legitimate reasons for acquiring intimate knowledge and expressing behaviors. Teaching, anti-racist teaching is acquiring intimate knowledge and expressing behaviors. That's what anti-racist teaching is. Outside of that classroom, you keep it to yourself though. Don't be coming up in the barrio or going into K-Town, cutting up. Don't do that. Only in the classroom, and then if you're invited to their mama and daddy's house. That's the only place you do it. Don't be going up in the mall, cutting up. Anyway, okay, cultivating trustworthiness. So teachers, trustworthy content expert. You avoid hypocrisy. If the rules of the school are good enough for the kids, you follow them too. You cannot be making up a rule that only the kids follow because it after 50 years, it manifests itself in the craziness that we see today. Cops breaking laws, but they're on Black and brown people for breaking the same laws. We teach them that when we say this rule in this classroom is for you, or this rule in in the school is for you, but the adults get to break it. We set up society to assume that if you have authority, the rules don't apply to you. And we teach people that in primary, middle, and high school. So no wonder a cop who's 25 years old is out there going, but I'm a cop, I get to do it. He watched every teacher he did it do it. There's a reason why we got the craziness we have today. So, some strategies: teach fairness by being fair, teach generosity by being generous, teach consideration by being considerate, teach self and interdependence by being an interdependent member of a classroom community, right? We need to break the cycle of ageism, which is on that intersectionality wheel, educationism, the privilege of being more educated, the privilege of being male, the privilege of being beautiful or whatever. Anything on an intersectionality wheel, we perpetuate in these classrooms. We treat the pretty kids better than the other kids. We teach the kids who speak English only better than we teach the polylingual kids. We need to stop supporting this hypocrisy because it manifests itself in a judge over there in Wisconsin cutting up, or January 6th. You know what I'm saying? It manifests itself over a long period of time where people are like, I'm sick and tired of not having privilege. I grew up, I became an authority, I got a job. Why can't I break rules and act a fool in the mall and not wear a mask? This is where this stuff comes from. Okay. Interactions grounded in respect. So, all of your interactions, you want to treat the students how they should treat themselves and others at all times, right? So, the teacher to student interactions, I have an example of this. I was talking to a kid in the hallway, and one of my fellow peers, one of my fellow science teachers comes up, and he just interrupts our conversation. And I had to go, hold up. I was talking to the student. He assumed that because he was the adult, he could ignore whatever me and this kid were talking about. He could interrupt because of ageism and educationalism and all that other stuff, right? So I had to demonstrate, no, I need you to respect the conversation that's happening, respect this kid so that they can grow up and do the same thing, right? Student to student interactions you are responsible for as a teacher. There will be no bullying, no name calling or whatever, right? Uh, just because the good kid in the classroom picks on this other kid, good kid meaning they turn their homework, they get good grades, they don't play around all the time. When that kid cuts up, they get the same punishment as the kid who cuts up every day. They don't get no leeway. So that you can teach fairness by being fair. You break the same rule, you get the same punishment. And then you help students mediate task and instructions, right? Tasks with each other in groups, whole class. You give them mediation and you teach it explicitly. Students must experience your respect, your intentionality, your integrity, and your dignity towards them. And it needs to be on purpose. No kid should know that you don't like them. No kid. You keep that sugar honey iced tea to yourself. All right. Some building respect and dignity and using humanizing pedagogies and interactions. Here's some principles that I teach. Do no harm to the kids and do no harm to yourself, right? Go easy on yourself and don't walk into a classroom expecting to put on the teacher identity at the expense of the children. You get that teacher identity worked out with other adults, get a therapist, go to church, do whatever the hell it is you need to do. But make sure that you're okay so that you're not putting this on the kids. Education should leave the kids feeling more like themselves after you taught them than before. They shouldn't leave your classroom feeling like they don't know who they are. They should be really grounded in who they are and very proud of their heritage and language and skin and hair and whatever else, right? They should feel more like themselves. after you've taught them. They should not be unraveled or undone. Engage students in authentic work. Don't be giving out worksheets every day. If you're a history teacher, teach primary sources and interviews and collecting data. If you're a math teacher, your word problem should be about business and science and engineering. If I'm a science teacher, we would talk about diabetes and genetics, and we was using the microscopes all the time, and pipetting, and water was boiling, and Bunsen burners was going off. We did this every week. So engage the kids in authentic work and put a dollar sign next to it. For instance, I would say, if you learn how to use this microscope and you get a certificate, they'll pay you $18 an hour to use it. If you get a degree in it, they'll pay you $25 an hour. I said, how much you think they paying me to teach you how to use it? And they would be like, I don't know, Miss Linton, how much? I said, my Z-pay is $65 an hour as a teacher. That's how much they're paying me to teach you how to use this scope. Do you think I had any problems with the babies coming up and using the microscopes after that? No, I did not, right? So I engaged them in student and authentic work, and then I made the work meaningful, relevant, and sustainable for them so that they could carry it from teacher to teacher. I'm trying to get through it. Epistemic practices and pedagogical content knowledge needs to be on point. You need to master your disciplinary practices, and then you need to be able to teach through them. I'm actually teaching engineering faculty how to do this right now. In science, it was experimentation, modeling, argumentation, and the negotiation of expository text. Those are the 4 practices I taught the students. They used them all year. By November, they could do them independently. By April, they could teach somebody else how to do them. If you are a math major, then math talks, problem solving, problem identification. If you're going into computer science, testing, debugging, looping are your epistemic practices. If you are an English teacher, plot, expository text writing and reading. If you are a social science person, it is use of primary sources, use of secondary sources, analyzing current events. So there are certain specific practices that you use in each of the professions that you need to make developmentally appropriate processes for the students to use them. This right here, this tenet number 5, was probably the number 1 reason why I can get 80% of my brown and black kids proficient or basic or advanced in biology and high needs Title I schools. This one right here. I was pretty good at the other things, but I mastered this. I can consistently get those outcomes from the kids. If the kids showed up every day, they were going to learn biology, and I could put my money where my mouth was. I've written about it, actually. Classroom routines and academic routines that make sense to the students. Don't have these kids looking crazy in the classroom. If you know who you are as a person, as a teacher, and you know these kids, make up classroom routines that make sense to them. So I was never a ask 3 then me or clap 3 times. I was never one of those kind of teachers. I'm standing on this. If I'm standing right here on this spot, that means everybody needs their eyes on me because I'm about to tell you something. If I'm not standing on this spot, that means y'all working independently. Y'all can talk to each other. You can get up and sharpen your pencil, blah, 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 blah. But if I'm standing on this spot, hands get raised, or I'll call on you. I'm explaining something, and we're going to be doing something together. If I'm sitting at my desk, that means y'all working independently. Don't come up here asking me for permission to go use the bathroom. If the bathroom pass is there, you get to go. So I was building independence amongst my kids because that's my personality and that's how I wanted to run my classroom. I rarely wrote referrals. They were rarely out of my classroom. I wasn't kicking kids out because the classroom routines fit us as a community. If I'm trying to mimic some strict teacher and my kids is like, you crazy, I'm gonna have chaos in my classroom. But I planned for student engagement. I implemented these strategies so that I could bring their effective level down. And I could change routines to adjust to the flow of the classroom. That is something that everybody as a teacher needs to understand. Don't put on someone else's routines if they don't fit you or your kids. Make them work for the personality of the culture of the classroom. It'll make, oh my goodness, you'll just be able to walk in with a cup of coffee and you can have a good time. That's what the thing is. That's what the purpose is. Y'all need to have a good time learning. All right. Um, Last but not least, create physically and emotionally safe classrooms. So this means cultivate collaborative learning amongst the babies, create a classroom embedded in congeniality, being nice to one another, um, making cultural sense to each other is super important. Approach differences in creative ways where the teacher is the facilitator, a classroom community development. Difference is good. Divergent thinking is what we want. We want ideas. Don't be afraid to share your take on things. I don't want everybody to be the same. I'm going to learn you. You're going to learn me. And you're going to learn each other. And also be an elder in the room. You're not there to make friends. They got friends. You're not their coach. You're not the if you don't if you're not hired as a coach, you're not their coach. If you're not hired as a counselor, you're not their counselor. If you're not, you're definitely not their mama or daddy, right? So I'm tired of hearing teachers go, "Oh, as teachers, we got to do A, B, and C, and we got to be their mamas and their daddies and their cat." No, you don't. We hired you to teach them. We also hired you to help them cope with those people that you think you have to be. But we didn't hire you to do all that. And I wasn't the counselor or the parent. I took on some of those personal elements, but I told them as a teacher, my middle name is Snitch. So if you do something, I am calling your mama, hands down, because I'm not your mama, right? So you want to be an elder in the room. You want to be that safety person that they can come and they know that you're going to be wise. That builds a lot of emotional safety in a classroom. All right. I think it's 121. I've talked a whole bunch. Any questions, comments, aha moments, whatnots? Let me get this. I want to see what happened in the chat. There's 4 folks. Okay. Okay. Um, Anyone? Bueller? Anything with the, you can turn your mic off or you can put it in the chat if you have a, what did you learn? I saw a lot of hand clapping and a lot of thumbs ups. Yeah, that's not my line. That's Dr. Etta Hollins's line. Teaching is the parent of all professions, which it is. So if a Wall Street business person is a complete incompetent, crazy person who's greedy as all get out, we made him. He went through our schools. You know, if cops are killing unarmed Black, brown, and white people, because truth be told, there are a whole lot of rural Appalachian white folk getting killed by police and ain't nobody even talking about it. Uh, we made them people who kill folk unarmed. We set that up. So if you can go through 20 years worth of education and not be empathetic and not be a protector of humanity, what were we teaching these people? We had them for a very long time, right? What were we teaching them? Anything else?
Uh, Dr. Linden, I think one of the things that really stood out to me that you mentioned was like, especially in this context, for people with privilege and power, um, they don't always invite us to the table. And like in tenant, what was it, 3, when you're talking about avoiding hypocrisy and making sure that they're acting the same way in which the expectation is on us, I think that I see that mirrored across spaces, like in the classroom for sure. and as we move higher in academia and even in like the workforce. And that's how like it just like makes me think, oh, if we had curbed some of these things in like the educational system, it might look different in our spaces now, right?
Right. Absolutely. So we can start to make that happen. And we can call out the lack of trustworthiness, because trustworthiness is about being anti-racist. A racist is incompetent emotionally and psychologically. They've been given a bunch of fluff about who they were that's unearned. But when they don't live up to what they've been told is rightfully theirs, they try to make it look like it's theirs by hook or crook. They become untrustworthy and they are incompetent. And we're not calling out the incompetency of the results. We're not calling out the the lack of trust. We're screaming anti-racist without breaking it down into what aspect of this is racist, right? What aspect of this? What's the result of the racist behavior? We've got an incompetent person making the decisions is a result of that. We need to call that out. We got somebody that nobody trusts in the space. We need to call that out, right? Because racism is been said so much that no, it's very ambiguous now. But I came up with 7 tenets. So when people come up to me and they suspect somebody to be racist, I go, I don't really care if they're racist. I need them to be functional. And if they're incompetent, if they're emotionally broken, they can't be trusted, I can call them out on those things and I can pull evidence of that. And then they won't be able to say nothing. Well, you're reverse. How can you call somebody out for their incompetency? You didn't do a job the way you were supposed to, the way you told us that you could. And this happened. And now we got a bigger problem than what we started with. You gonna call me reverse racist? No, I just called you out on your work. I didn't say nothing about your race. But I have a feeling because I'm Black and I'm interacting with you, you've become incompetent or your competency has been exposed because you didn't know what you needed to know. And this emotional response to the color of my skin complicated that and compounded that even more. But now I get to call you on the fact that you didn't know what you was doing to begin with. I got you. Now, I can help you get some due process. I can help you get some competency. But if my skin keeps you from even getting that opportunity, I ain't got nothing for you, baby. I'm about to call HR on you because you're putting people in danger at this point. You can't do your job. So I got to send you to HR. But I'm not sending you to HR because you're racist. I'm sending you to HR because your racism has made you incompetent and now you're putting other people in jeopardy. And I know Fullerton ain't going to have that. They not with that. They want everybody to be safe. They don't want no sexual harassment. They don't want no racism. And they definitely want you to be able to do your job. So Fullerton will figure that out. Your incompetency has been exposed. Yes. It's life experience. It's complete life experience. Um, I am very cognizant of time. I think we have about 10 more minutes. So I don't know if I'm down. I only have 2 slides. I'm going to read a slide and then I'm going to give you my email. So there's nothing really after this. What you need? Anybody? Anyone? Anyone? How y'all like my slide presentation? I'm learning how to make presentations by Dr. Fernando Rodriguez Miles.
I
That's my
could see the influence.
yes. That's my work husband.
I love the backdrop falling backwards.
Oh yeah, I
Um,
was up last night
Christian.
playing. Like I got a little fire because it's hot topic, so I got a little fire on every slide. You know, I was doing it. Doing it. Anyway,
I do have a question for you, Doctor.
yes, by all means.
In doing this work and having been a teacher yourself and still teaching at the college level, but I'm thinking when you were in the classroom with the kids, what did you find most challenging for you um, where you had to spend, you know, some of this, I think, just knowing you is natural for you. It
Mm.
comes naturally because of the influences you've had in your life, because of the way that the worldview lens that you've created, that you've developed, etc. But what are within these tenets? What are some of the areas that were real challenges for you? I know you talked about tenet 5, I think it was. Was it 5?
10 and 5 epistemic practices.
Yeah, that you found challenging. Were there other areas or aspects that were challenging for you?
Um, Creating how deep I needed to go to create a physically and emotionally safe classroom was important to me. And I knew it was going to be a challenge. I'm going to tell you something, some real super personal, but I'm a big Brene Brown fan. And so you deal with shame and you can deal with that stuff. When I first started teaching, I was going through the divorce, getting a new job, finishing school, moving. There's like 7 traumas or 8 traumas that a person can go through. And I went through 4 right before I started teaching. And then 2 years after um, 2 years after I began teaching, my grandmother died. My matriarch, the one that I pull from for my discipline and my stoicism, and she died unexpectedly. So I was like, if I'm going to keep it together and be authentic and still keep these babies safe, I can't be going through these traumas without assistance. So before I taught my very first class as a credential student, I actually got a therapist. I was going to take care of myself with the best of my ability. And really I found I still have her till today. Like, I every now and then, I'll check in. But she got me through understanding myself, um, really setting up my life so that I could have emotional, psychological, physical, spiritual support so that when stuff popped off in the classroom or when I saw kids interact in negative ways, I actually had somebody to talk to about it. And she told me something once that was so important because I was struggling when I came up to LA because this was a different get down. Like, I'm from Kentucky and I lived in San Diego. Working in South Central was the most different cultural space that I've been in thus far. And I learned how to teach at Hoover High School in San Diego that has 14 different languages represented in their student population. And coming up to South Central Los Angeles was a whole different animal, right? And I was like, what have these babies gone through that, their own one? My therapist said to me, she goes, they've been stripped of so much power and they've been mistreated so badly that the only sense of power that they have is to make your life difficult in the classroom. And once I understood that, I understood, oh, I have to set up my classroom where they have power. They have power over their learning. They have power over the classroom routines. They have power over which assignments they want to turn in. I'm the one with all the power in the classroom. No matter what they did, that wasn't going to change. So why not empower them with my privilege then? I was trying to interpret and translate a culture from South San Diego to South Central. Those are 2 different things. I had to learn my students and earn their trust. And then I had to find out what power meant to them, what feeling good about themselves academically as students meant to them. That's a struggle, but you have to be open. I think the scientist in me, I'm a cell molecular biologist by trade. I did sepsis research. I think the biologist in me makes me curious, makes me want to collect data, really. And so it's easy to for me to go in, well, let me see some patterns. Let me see some patterns in their interactions with each other. Let me eavesdrop because I'm an ear hustler. I got mama vision and mama ears. They could be in the back of the room and I could be listening to their conversation, be answering questions. They'd be like, how does she hear us? But I'm listening attentively, not to say got you, but to get to know you so that I'll know what you value enough so that I can put it in this classroom. And at times, I didn't know what the heck was going on in I'm like, what do you value? And they were like, what are you talking about? And I would have to explain to them, you have to talk to me. You have to tell me what you know and what you don't know in order for me to do any of this stuff. So if this is boring, tell me how it cannot be boring. You know, if this isn't working, then we're gonna sit down and work out what we need to do together. Cause, I ain't got nothing but time, but I don't it's so frustrating to be an ineffective teacher. It's super frustrating. But I had enough wits about me to go, but I can problem solve through that. I can be an effective teacher, right? I just had to get out of my own way. I couldn't have my own isms in my way of being an effective teacher. I had to be humble. I had to get in the habit and show my kids I had the habit of talking to y'all. Whatever y'all need, I'm the queen of everything. So I can get it for you. But if you don't tell me, I won't know. So I'm having real conversations with students. And I'm not this big adult, who knows everything. I want to have a good time in this classroom. I want to have a good time with you. This time 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I was planning on my Thanksgiving theme, and we was wrapping up some stuff, and I was buying candy, and we was gonna watch the Thanksgiving Charlie Brown special on Friday before we went out on break. That's what I like to do. And that's my mom. I get to share my mom with these kids. So the physically and emotionally safe classrooms was a challenge to me because I was going through my own spiritual emotional journey, and I had to separate that from cultivating these kids, you know, as academics and great people and being an elder. That right there, that boundary had to be very clear. I could not go in exercising out my own issues onto other people's kids. That's not what they pay us to do. So I had to make sure that I had an outlet for that. And learning those epistemic practices too. Um, what I didn't learn all of them until 2013 when there was a science article came out April 19th, 2019, on assessment at NGSS. And they explained what the NGSS was moving to assess. And that's why I went, oh, I was supposed to be using engineering design as well. But I had really good mentorship. And my department chair, Robert Manro of Castle Park, was awesome. And we developed some of these processes and practices together. But I didn't learn that in my credential program to do that. So, you know what I did when I came to Cal State Fullerton? I embedded it in my science methods program. My candidates now know it is expected to do the epistemic practices and develop those and teach those with students. So that's something I didn't learn. But yeah, the other stuff is my mama and daddy and just being a decent human being. But it's important though. Um, it's it's a different take on what it's like to cultivate other people's children.
Thank you for that. And two things. One, I'm sorry that you lost your grandmother.
Goodness.
That must have been very difficult. But two, for your vulnerability here with us today and to really speak to the fact that your own centeredness and your own mental health and well being mattered so much in your ability to effectively teach.
Right.
Regardless of all the tools you had, all the resources that you had, all the talent, skill sets, that
Right.
centeredness, self centeredness was very important. So thank you
Self
for
care. Yeah.
yes.
So when the athletes were talking about self care, I was like, yeah, I've been doing that for 20 years. Yes, I agree. Mental health is so important. And you don't have to be schizophrenic or manic or whatever. You could just be going through some stuff. If you don't have a best friend to talk to, a clergy person or a spiritual leader, uh, uh, a wise family elder, you got to have somebody who you can go to who's lived a life, who consistently tells you things that you try out and work for you. You gotta set that up if you're gonna be working with people's kids, especially at the secondary level where you're gonna have between 150 to 200 personalities to deal with every day. That's crazy if you think that you mentally sound and if you can't deal with your boyfriend or girlfriend on a regular basis, just think of teaching 150 other people's kids. How you gonna be Superman or Superwoman? You ain't that. So you're gonna have to set up your circle. And I had a great therapist, a really great best friend, and my dad in those first formative years. I had a trifecta of people that I could trust and that I could lean on when things got harder. I needed a chai latte and a magazine in the borders. You need that sometimes. And it worked out. So points to ponder. To avoid the all too common deficit perspective, let's lens the culturally responsive, relevant, and sustaining teaching as opportunities to share different types of problem solving and ways of being. In this way, students can add to their assets and be collaborative within their community as well as globally. So that's the point of all of this anti racism work here. Um, if you should have some questions, do not hesitate to send me that fire. And I'm glad that this was great and that folks had an aha moment and whatnot. And I'm going to stop sharing. That was fun.
Wow. Good job, Dr. Linton. Yeah, I just want to thank you so much for sharing, your personal experience and your 7 attendance, and definitely learned a lot. My Zoom crashed, so that's why I'm in here with Ricardo. But it's still recording, so no worries. But yeah, I definitely learned a lot.
It's the government, man.
Why?
Maybe.
They don't want this info out there.
The idea. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. It's not the government.
But thank you so much, Dr. Linton, for really just taking some time out of your afternoon and sharing all of this information with us. I think coming into it, we knew that we were going to get a lot of rich information from you, just in terms of how our educational practices impact secondary education, but thinking about how it transcends that and goes into all parts of like life, I think has been so beneficial. So we really appreciate your time and energy today, and hopefully we'll collaborate again soon.
Yeah. I work here, so this is where I work. You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad it was very informative. I'm hoping
Thank you.
practical. Thank you.
Good job, you all. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
And relatable. Hey. I'm reading the chat as they leave. I'm like, hey, it's relatable. It's inspiring. Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, and we'll definitely download the chat and the
Please.
recording and send it to you.
Please. Thank you.
Yes.
Awesome.
Awesome. All right, everyone. All right. Bye. Enjoy your
Talk to you
afternoon.
later.
Oh my God, my Zoom had a crash.
Oh, I guess.